Greetings! We are recording on Saturday, May 8th, 2021, and I am your host, Sean. Joining me today are co-hosts Zach.
Hey, everyone.
And Rob.
What's up?
You're listening to episode 2 of the 4 for 4 podcast. This is a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive on 4 select shows from the current anime season and discuss them in 4-episode batches week by week. This week, we're covering episodes 1 through 4 of the adaption of the highly praised manga To Your Eternity. But before we go into the episode discussion, we're just going to have a brief conversation on kind of how we select our shows and ultimately what the final roster of what we're covering this season entails. With what we choose, we're kind of looking first and foremost at something we all enjoy. And this season in particular has made it very difficult because there's many shows we enjoy this season. It's
spoiled for choice.
I feel like I'm the wild card here too.
Yeah, incredibly spoiled for choice. This might be the best season of anime in years, just in terms of what offerings there are and in terms of quality.
Hush, and 2019 and 2020 want a word with you, sir.
I mean, I don't think I've seen a season this good since like 2011, 2012 personally, but so first episode we covered Megalobox. This week we're covering To Your Eternity. Next week we're covering 86. And now we finally decided that our last show we're going to be covering is Odd Taxi. So initially when we were discussing the concept behind this show, we were initially thinking maybe covering 1 or 2 of the more popular ones, while the other 2 perhaps would be something a little more niche or underappreciated in this season. But after some longer discussions and considerations, we finally came to the conclusion that it has to be something we're all at least partially on board with, because we've decided we never want this show to be about hate watching. So yeah, any thoughts from you guys?
Well, I think the discourse around hate watching, there's not much to glean from it besides, obviously what feelings of bitterness or what puts you off on a series. But I think there's not very many directions to go when you're hate watching a series besides just hitting the same nails with the hate hammer, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you can get a lot of discussion from it, but it's usually not fun.
You're very heavily limited with what you can discuss.
Yeah, look, guys, don't make us hate watch something, please. Don't make it a special episode, guys. We definitely don't want to do a special hate watch episode, okay? It's definitely not in the future, so don't even think about it, okay?
Yeah, please. We're not going to be discussing your redo of Healers or...
Oh, absolutely not. I'm not going to watch that. I refuse. Don't.
I mean, for some people that is fun, that is fulfilling, but we've decided that that's just not the direction we want to take our show. So yeah, originally My Hero Academia was in the cards for our discussion because historically we've all loved My Hero Academia, but in such a stacked season where we feel there's so many unique shows that are so deserving of some limelight, and frankly that we're enjoying way more, as we all agree, this season of My Hero is a bit on the weaker side.
Past 2 seasons, but okay.
we're just gonna keep it to stuff we're all really legitimately interested in. So last week was Megalobox for this season. This week's To Your Eternity, and going forward will be 86 next week. And for the final show we're covering this season, Odd Taxi. So any more thoughts on show selection before we move on?
Nope. Personally, I think all of these shows have different things going for them, and they're unique in their own special way. I have very differing thoughts and opinions and reasons why I'm excited to cover each of these shows, so I'm looking forward to it. What about you, Rob?
Agreed. I would like to give a shout out, or kind of a honorable mention to at least 3 shows that I have been watching in my own time as well. That being Vivi. Vivi is fantastic. I think that it has potential to go places. It also has potentials to go straight to the dumpster. Pending. Mars Red is actually really, really good. I love the animation style, the music, the way that the director gives us scene compositions. Very fantastically done. I'm only 2 episodes deep, so I'm looking to get more into it. And I also am a sucker for Your Snow White Notes. That one is actually really, really good, although Sean has his gripes about it. I can kind of see where he's coming from. I want it to more focus on the MC and his transformation into finding his own sound rather than any sort of romantic hubbubs. If I want to watch romantic stuff, I'm going to watch that. But
yeah, I can sympathize with those feelings because I actually watched those Snow White Notes last night, and sadly, it didn't compel me as much as I thought it would be, which is a little surprising because music plays such a heavy role in it's a reason why a lot of anime stick out to me, some of my favorites. But that's not to say I don't diss on the quality of that series. I'm actually enjoying it quite a lot. But I think
your Snow White Notes. I'm sorry, I meant those Snow White Notes. Apologies.
It's English. We're Americans. We don't even know how to. But no, I would say my sleeper hit would be Mars Red. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I am. I binged the 4 currently aired episodes of it, and I do look forward to each one coming out. But with that being said, I think the 4 series we're covering in this podcast are, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the ones I'm most interested in. So, Sean, I don't know if you share that same sentiment.
Yeah.
But
So, yeah, those are very good honorable mentions, Rob. We kind of all came to a kind of a core set of shows we were all deliberating on. And really, for the last slot, it came down to either those Snow White Notes, Mars Red, or Odd Taxi. We kind of considered what they all had to offer, what made them unique, what was most worthy of discussion. And in the end, it got pretty close between Odd Taxi and Mars Red. But in the end, we got to give it to Odd Taxi because you'll occasionally get the military or vampire or both show in the anime season, but
when do we get something that's like Beastars, where we're viewing, essentially furries? You're compelled by the characters themselves, but that's going to be a discussion for a future podcast.
Really, it's less the anthropomorphized animals and more the very unique writing and direction of the show. I think that compels us for it. But
let's not kid ourselves. We all need a little more Bruce Springsteen in our life.
Okay, so with that, let's kind of get into the discussion for To Your Eternity. Before we start discussing the episodes, though, Rob, what was your kind of prior knowledge or experience with it before we actually dived in?
So, prior knowledge is, of course, like our with like Jeff and Giguk with their, seasonal events. Like, hey, these are the things that we're watching and you should probably check out. And was just immediately entranced by the animation and just the trailer itself. Enough so that I actually started reading the manga. So I'm really into this show, if that's any indication, because I don't really go out of my way to read manga, but I'm very just entranced and in love with the show.
Yeah, as for me, I've heard about the manga for a number of years and always sort of like really rave reviews. I'm a bit more inclined to check out manga that pique my interest. For whatever reason, though, I never got around to Your Eternity, so I was very pleasantly surprised to see that there was an anime season of it coming out, so I guess I just waited to check that out, and I'm happy I did, because it's turning out to be a really good show. What about you, Zach?
So strangely enough, I first began kind of my long streak of binging very hot and topical manga series starting in late high school, which for me would have been around mid to late 2016, which is funny enough when To Your Eternity first began its publication. But somehow it slipped through the cracks, and I had never heard of the series up until this point when it started airing this season. I think Jeff from Mother's Basement was very quick to bring this show to light and really, I guess, covering how unique it is and how much it really stands out from the rest in an already otherwise stacked season. So my curiosity was definitely piqued with it. But prior to his video, I had never heard of this series. And I will say, this will be going into our episode 1 discussion, but I think it has among one of the greatest hooks, like first episodes a series can have. And that's one of the best compliments I could give to a series like this that I've had no prior knowledge to.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, we're we like to try to give shows 4 episodes before we make a decision on everything. And it's very, very rare that we come into something that immediately after that first episode, you're craving more. Like, you're like, nope, I need more. It's kind of like me back when Game of Thrones first started airing. I watched the first few episodes, got caught up, and I was like, nope, that is not enough for me, and immediately picked up the books. To Your Eternity is the same thing. Watched the first 2 episodes, and I was like, nope, that's not enough. Immediately picked up the manga.
Yeah, I can definitely associate with that. There's been plenty of books I've picked up with that mindset, from TV or movies. But yeah, To Your Eternity has, as we'll discuss, is an amazingly strong first episode. With that, let's begin with episode 1 then. So to start, we have a scene set to some pretty melancholic cello music, and we have a narrator kind of saying how he made an orb that was meant to record information and
capture reflections. Yeah.
Capture reflections. And he sends it to this planet. Could be Earth. We don't know. But it's very Earth-like in the very least. As he said, it's an orb that captured the reflections of many things and changed in response. So he wanted to observe the orb, see its experiences and how it interacted with the environment around it. Begins kind of hitting a rock, it turns into a rock. There's implied eons that go by, then it turns into moss. And then finally, however long later, a Reshi wolf dies upon where the orb is, and then the orb turns into the Reshi wolf. And
I wanna interject here.
Sure.
Be mindful of the wound on the wolf. Just what side is it on? Because that comes into play later within this episode.
Yeah, he did. I noticed he did incarnate, I guess, with the wound.
He did, but it was a left rear leg wound.
But also, it sealed up very quickly upon when he came into, when he generated into the wolf. So I don't think the wound was actually visible, like after a few minutes of him turning into the wolf.
Yeah, after he transformed, it pretty much immediately healed, but I just wanted to bring attention to you that it was a left leg wound, because I think that has some sort of significance later in this episode. It is also the first point where this orb became conscious. It has a self-preservation. The wound is its first pain. It had to learn to walk. It's its first experience with its sensory stuff, with like snow and cold and everything like that. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. And I mean, already just from the simple and beginning sequence, you kind of are introduced to this really neat concept. I mean, the title To Your Eternity already in my mind is kind of taking shape with how this narrative's going to go. But yeah, the wound heals quickly, but now it's conscious, it knows pain, and now it's going north now. And eventually it wanders upon a very small settlement, clearly made from a boat hull. And this is where we are introduced to the boy. I don't believe he's named, right?
No name. We never get a name.
Nope.
Okay. So apparently the wolf's name, because the boy ended up knowing the wolf, he calls it Joanne. And he's just absolutely jubilated to see the wolf. He said he was gone for about a month, right?
Approximately, yeah.
So it's kind of this whole intro scene. What did you all think of it?
So let me start because I can't hold in the gush anymore. I gotta let my gushing out. I can't tell you how captivated just the first maybe 3 minutes this episode made me.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm a big music nut. I love it when you can give me a story, you can give me the best characters, you can tell me how important they are or why I should care about them. But when you make me just, I don't know if how to put it into words, but I rewatched episode 1 yesterday kind of to freshen up my mind and what we were going to discuss today. But man,
do it at your own risk.
Yeah, I am moved to tears nearly every time I revisit this first intro sequence. And even watching the entire episode, like I ended up watching the entire rest of the episode.
Same.
Just the very raw and visceral feelings, the emotions it brings out of me. I can't tell you enough how much it speaks to me.
The music does a ton of heavy lifting in this first episode. Really, I can't praise it enough either.
Yeah, and I have a lot more to say, particularly about the music when we get further into our discussion. But yeah, to me, it's easily the highlight of every episode in my book.
Yeah. So the wolf, I'll just be referring to him as Orb for the rest of the episodes. But Orb goes into the home with the boy. He ends up loving the home. The narrator says if it could speak, it would have said it wanted to stay here forever. This is really Orb's first interaction with another conscious being. And this is really developing Orb and giving it stimulation that's never received before. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it has its first meal, goes to sleep with the boy. And the next episode, the boy's doing chores. He's cutting wood. He refers to the home as Auntie's place. And he believes his family will come back. He says it's been 5 years and that they've all gone to paradise. So he's here all alone. He's clearly still recovering from some sort of disaster where he had to stay behind and the rest of his family had to move on.
It was intrinsically said that Joanne stopped him from going.
Yeah, because he bit him in the leg.
Itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Joanne bit him in the leg. He says that a bit later. And yeah, he had to stay there, care for the elderly. Eventually they all passed and it's just him there. So really, he has very early memories of not living in this kind of small area. But for most of it, what seems like most of his life, at least all of his independent life, he has lived here merely surviving in this very hostile kind of Arctic environment.
Mm-hmm. I do want to call to attention the environmental storytelling at play here, because before the boy kind of alludes to what we're already suspicious of, him being alone with these wrecked ships, and you mentioned like he lives in the hull of a destroyed ship, but you see the faces he's carved into the walls, you see the paraphernalia that he has around the house, what he sets around the outside, like the environments around his residence. You can already tell this boy has a very real sense of self-isolation and is trying to cling on to what family or society or sense of society that he has left. And you learn more through it as he eventually decides to venture out and be brave to, and it finally has the resolve to leave everything behind and go seek out his family because he's waited so long for them to return to him. But,
he wants to leave and experience the world. That's his main drive.
Right.
Yeah. And like so many people in thoroughly isolated situations do, you kind of, you make your own friends in your mind to keep a social part of your brain going. And fortunately, he didn't have to Wilson the entire thing because he had the Reshy Wolf, which, while it can't actually talk to him, at least, it is conscious. It does have emotions. There is a reciprocal relationship there. So,
well, I would like to kind of interject here real quick.
Yep.
And like when the orb first came back to the home, the boy did notice an immediate difference between the orb and Joanne. Like, he called it out, like, you're not talking to me like you normally do.
Well, it clearly doesn't have the same appetite either when he's, given the same dinners, the same, favorite treats, if you will.
Yeah, good point. But really, by talking, I assume he just means in his gestures and...
Right, well,
yeah.
barking,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And based on a certain scene later in the episode, I think he may have ascribed like certain imaginary dialogue with the wolf. But yeah, he definitely notices a difference about Joanne. So yeah, as you said, Zach, he wants to leave and experience the rest of the world. He's tired of living here. He knows sooner or later he's going to die here. And he's determined to finally leave and see the rest of the world, to make it hopefully to paradise where he believes the rest of his family is.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets prepared. He gets a bunch of supplies. And throughout the entire thing, he's just really upbeat. He keeps a really positive demeanor in the face of just some of the worst circumstances. And really, in this sort of long-term isolated survival scenario, I have to believe you almost have to adopt that kind of mindset, or you're just going to be crushed by despair and you'll lose the will to live.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of thought, I'm like, man, I'm really gonna have to put up with this like upbeat demeanor for the rest of this show, and it's just like kind of shudder to think about it. I mean, like I'm about being happy-go-lucky, but his optimism is just like smothering almost.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know about you. That wasn't the impression I got. To me, like the more I watched him, like, oh man, he is desperately. This is a very desperate optimism.
Yeah, the way I saw it was he's teetering on the edge of a breaking point. That's how I was kind of seeing it personally.
But to be honest,
because it is so forced. It's so forced.
It is.
Yeah,
and
sorry,
I think we
you're
get
gonna
that
say
relayed through the voice acting as well.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, he's kind of at his breaking point. He needs to start moving. He's determined to just leave or die trying. So he gets all packed up. He leaves southward to where his family last went. And we're kind of set to a montage here with some pretty, like I would say, optimistic, upbeat music, following stone markers with some arrows as his family set out all those years ago. But then suddenly we run into our first major issue where he falls through some ice, which normally would be a death sentence in such an environment. But fortunately for him, he was very prepared. He had all the supplies he needs to kind of deal with this situation. He erects kind of a tent. He heats it up and he lives through this, but it's just the first in many kind of...
He sustained a huge leg wound, which was on the same side.
Yeah.
Left leg, same side as the Reshi Wolf.
Yep.
At the beginning of the episode. He does tape it up. I do kind of really want to point home to how the artists show how really brutally cold it is, because his nose is almost always red and the tips of his fingers are actually red too. And I'm thinking to myself, there is no way that this kid is not frostbitten.
Oh yeah, he's at least getting frostburn. And that's what I was going to say. This is ultimately what does him in, is that leg wound. But he is able to get heated back up, only just enough, because he's clearly still very cold throughout the entire thing. And as Rob said, I love the attention to detail with just how cold he is. They illustrate this very well. So he gets packed up. He continues south.
Huge fuck off blizzard.
Yes, in a huge blizzard with a bad leg wound. But
still has his resolve though. Like his optimism's still there,
despite all of this. Yeah,
right.
He still
hasn't broken it. Hasn't broken him, and I admire that about him.
Yeah, and this is kind of when we really get to the first majorly heartbreaking scene of the episode. The music's way more melancholic now. He's clearly exhausted, and he finally comes across wreckage and some shallow graves, and he quickly learns this is his family. And I remember him saying, "This is amazing, Joanne. Evidence people were here." And, then he kind of realizes this was his family, and this is where he breaks down. And
finally breaks, man, and it was tough. That was tough.
Yeah. And this is kind of where he acknowledges he's just been talking to himself the whole time. And the real sad part is he sees Joanne, or the orb, truly as a true friend. And he believes he selfishly brought the wolf along on a
Kind of a suicide mission.
Yeah, a futile dream. So he believes it's in both his best interest and his friend's best interest to just go back at this point. He makes a very long, harsh journey back.
Do you want to have a call out here to the shot of his leg on the travel back?
Oh, yeah, it's
we can
getting
see
ever
that
worse.
that he's still bleeding through the bandages. So excellent scene composition with that to give us, again, a show, don't tell. Like, he's not saying, oh, my leg hurts. Like, the manner in which he's moving and struggling.
Let's not forget, like, he's not even at the point where, like, they're ready to turn back when he first gets the injury. He goes on a week-long journey. A week passes him going south.
Mm-hmm.
So he spends another week going back to his residence. So yeah, it's no surprise that the wound does him in.
Yeah, and there's even portions where the wolf Orb is literally having to drag him along in order to keep him going. And finally
he had to crawl into the house.
Yeah.
Literally crawl.
Yeah, he finally does make it back to his house, crawling in. He's kind of weeping in his dark room. He gets a fever, and he kind of says to Orb, you haven't had a meal, I'll make you a meal. Some amount of time passes with him and his fever and his wound, but then finally...
He keeps on saying it's healing, and once it heals, we're going to try this again.
And it's clearly not. So yeah, finally, we kind of reach the end here. He knows he's done, and he wants to be in his chair because he says, I don't want to be lying down. I look best in my chair. So he just crawls into his chair just to die.
Well, man, I gotta bring it up. Just knowing where his mental state is, because he states his intention, but there's more to it than that. He doesn't want whatever remnants of his family that he thinks may find him. He wants to face them when they enter. He doesn't want to be down and out, if you will. He wants to face them with a smile. And unfortunately, he does pass away, but with a smile on his face to whoever goes through that door.
Yep. And this is where Orb, as is of his nature, when the boy dies, he's kind of nuzzling him. He's clearly sad, and then he turns into the boy because he's in contact. He's in that emotionally heightened state. He has that stimulation because, as the narrator says, the conditions
must be met.
Yep. And one of those conditions are stimulation. My impression, either through physical sensation or emotional or both. But right. I think it has to do with all of them. I think all of these things must be a factor. So he turns into the boy. He kind of has a vision, or I don't know if it's him with the vision. It may be the boy's final thoughts, but we kind of see him going out to his family, believing he's reached paradise. But that vision kind of turns into Orb. It shifts into Orb. Like we know this didn't happen, but Orb is now taking on this boy's dream of seeing the world. So,
well said. That is what I got from it.
So Orb, he kind of walks out the door, and then he starts wandering south to where the boy is trying to reach. And that's kind of where we leave off into the next episode. Before moving on, any final thoughts on this first episode? Because I think it is definitely one of the strongest first episodes to a show. Really, I've just seen an anime, period.
I thought it was a great introduction to the show. Like we said at the start of this view, it immediately invested me into this world. I want to see more of it. I want to, experience this stimulation with the orb. I'm down. I'm ready. Let's go.
Yeah, man, I have very, very mixed feelings about this because on one hand, I don't know if another episode in this series will reach the same emotional heights that this one has made me feel. I feel like it started as strong as it possibly could, but the challenge from here on is to either keep up this momentum or you have to be wary of, will it stay in this direction? Will the emotional storytelling stay this strong? Because personally, this is easily my favorite episode of the series, hands down. And it's still pretty early on for sure. But I will say I won't be forgetting about this anytime soon. I believe, but as cliche as it sounds, even years from now, I still will remember this episode and the impact it has. And I think makes for the strong case of how important your first episode is and how it can be to hook an audience.
Definitely. And as you said, also for me, it's by far the strongest episode. And that is very important because that's what sold me on the show. And if we had started with like episode 2, and from there, I don't know if that would have been quite enough for me. That is to say, that's not to say that's not a good show, but that first episode really just did so much. But with that, let's get on to episode 2. We see Orb next. He keeps walking south. He's stated to have died about 6 times, I believe, on his way, with each time coming back, or each time regenerating a little quicker than the last.
Pain promotes growth. None of his deaths or its deaths are wasted.
Right.
Yeah.
I believe by the time we meet our kind of new protagonists, I say protagonists in the plural sense because I would say there's a handful in this arc, at least in the beginning of the series, but I believe his death count is up to 8 by the time he meets the person we're about to meet at the beginning.
I think it's 7 because Onigumi, the bear, so he comes across a valley, finally Green Valley. It's clearly beautiful to him, like he's enraptured by the sight. But then he gets swiped off a cliff by a big
fuck off bear.
By a huge fuck off bleeding bear that looks like something from Princess Mononoke. But
which is also something that I kind of want to talk about, because do you guys kind of get like animation fills from Ghibli, like inspirations from Ghibli?
Really, to me, only with the bear.
That's it, Sean? No, I definitely get Ghibli vibes from a certain few.
Yeah.
By all means, tell me then. Cause honestly, I'm really...
March?
I haven't
Panora?
seen... Okay, fair enough.
You're not getting
getting
Ghibli vibes from that? Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess
those
I
were going
didn't
to be my examples.
think about it that hard. Okay, fair enough. So yeah, he's swiped off a cliff by a big fuck off bear. This is his 7th death, and this, I believe that he just kind of drifts in the stream to where we find him next from there. But yeah, as Zach said, we have a new setting, kind of a new cast of characters. And first among this cast is the young girl March.
Rambunctious girl.
Yes, the rambunctious girl in a kind of a small village environment. They seem pretty primitive, but they're happy.
Tribe. Kind of a likeness to Aztecs, I would say.
Yeah. But they seem like a pretty happy people. We come to learn they're the Ninana people, or it's at the very least the Ninana region. But yeah, this small village, pretty primitive, but life seems good here. March is playing with her dolls, and an older girl comes by. We come to learn her name is Perona. I'm not sure if she's actually her sister, or
No.
Okay. I didn't think so, but she definitely sees herself like an older sister figure to March, and we'll come to learn why that is later. But March is very happy. She really wants to be a mother. She has very strong maternal instincts and very good relationship with her family. However, before I get to that, we do see some scenes with Perona practicing archery. We learn that she's not a good shot, which will also come into import a little later. But we learn the village is gathering for an event, and we see in a scene Perona is kind of trying to whisk March away due to this event, but they are stopped by a lady coming into the village, and we come to figure out this is why the village is gathering. So before we get to that, any thoughts on March and Perona?
Perona's my waifu.
Oh, come on, Rob. I know you have a lot more to say than that. No, you won't sit here and tell me that there's not some major like fuck tradition vibes going on.
Well, we're not into the fuck tradition vibes going on yet.
I would argue otherwise.
From what we have established right now, it's just a gathering. Perona is happily accepted into what appears to be archery, which may be a nod towards her being a warrior with this tribe, which is pretty neat. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing really, I would say, fucky going on at this particular moment until they're confronted in the forest when Perona's trying to squirrel her away.
Maybe my mind went, like, already saw what was coming, because as soon as you see this group that enters the village, I'm like, okay, maybe it's my prior experiences with media like this, certain other anime or animated television shows, but I kind of already knew where this ride was taking me, and it was pretty much on the mark.
Huh. I didn't quite have that impression, to be honest, but I also feel like I knew something was up because, honestly, I think maybe it was the preview that gave that away.
Now, I will be fair. I give these negative connotations, but I will say my expectations weren't necessarily, it's hard because going into this, I'm like, okay, personally, I don't want the story to continue in this direction, but I think it doesn't, and it actually goes in a more interesting way. So I just want to bring that up. It's not all negativity with the beginning of this episode.
Yeah, I wasn't especially negative on this sequence. It's not a very long sequence, but yeah, no, what I got from it was it's a very secluded but kind of happy primitive village, and being a mother is clearly, like, it's the expectation for a girl like March. Like, that is what she is growing to be. So maybe you can glean some things from that about the lifestyle of this village. But they are gathering, it, as it turns out, because there is going to be a sacrifice. And Perona knew this was coming, as we'll find out due to some prior experience. But before we get to that, let's just take a quick break, and we'll be right back. And we're back. So the village is gathering due to the news from newcomers in the village, people that we now know are of the nation of Yaname, the people who stopped Perona and March. They're there to announce a sacrifice to the regional god they call Oniguma. And they say it's for the prosperity of the Ninana region. And kind of the woman leading this, the one who stopped them, her name is Hayase. And she says they need to choose an untarnished girl to offer to Oniguna-sama. So they have an old lady, I kind of interpret to be like a shaman, and she checks the mouths of numerous girls. We don't really know why she's checking their mouths. We infer this has something to do with their purity. And eventually she chooses March. So we see the village congratulating March because this is supposed to be a great honor. Her parents are all congratulating, but then once they get back to their house, they kind of break down because they know what this means. They know their daughter is going to be sacrificed, and I mean, they can't bring themselves to find any joy in this. And this is where Hayase kind of comes in, tells them, so we're going to be taking your daughter, we're going to be watching over her till the celebration. And she kind of gives a schedule for the sacrificial proceedings. There will be a celebration, then they're going to ascend the mountain nearby for 3 days, where they will then sacrifice March to Oniguma, and then I believe it's a year later they'll come back to collect her remains. So any thoughts on this entire scene?
I think it kind of throws back again to like the Aztec culture where everybody is celebrating the death of a young maiden again, because that's what they believed in Aztec culture, was that sacrifice would bring great crops and, adhere to the gods' wills and make sure that they were still within favor of the gods. So I mean I can kind of see it. Still don't think that it's necessarily great to be celebrating an untarnished girl's death or sacrifice, but it's a different world, it's a different culture. So
yeah. Man, I don't mean to bring a negative connotation to this, because the first thing my mind went to was, oh yeah, this is gonna be a fuck tradition story. I just want to let it be known that I don't typically dislike stories with this mold necessarily, but I will just put it out there that I guess I wasn't prepared for this kind of show to go in this direction after episode 1. And I think it took me aback a bit too hard and grounded me in a way that I didn't desire. But with that being said, that brings us to March being delivered in the forest on the way up the mountain.
Yeah, before that, though, I am a little curious. You said that kind of brings you back a little bit from what you wanted this. So how did you envision the story originally going?
So I expected this orb would be on a journey, if you will, because, of course, it's seeking stimulation. It's seeking experiences.
So if you don't mind me interjecting for a moment, were you kind of envisioning something like a mushishi?
Yeah, it's that obvious, isn't it?
That's kind of where I thought you might be going with that.
Yeah.
Like, on one hand, I really like... So for any of you who haven't seen Mushishi, it's just kind of an individual, kind of out of place, out of time. It's a very episodic show. He goes, from place to place, region to region, helping people. They're very self-contained episodic narratives, but they're typically very powerful. So, yeah, on one hand, I can definitely see why you might be a bit disappointed in that. But if I'm being honest, and this is more to my preferences, I had kind of a hard time getting in to second season of Mushishi because after a certain amount of time, I wanted a little more. I'm definitely a guy who likes a more serialized plot, even if it is in smaller arcs. So I was actually kind of happy it went in this direction. I'll say a little more on it later, but yeah, I mean, these batch of episodes after the first, I'm probably not enjoying quite as much, but I can definitely see it building into something more substantial that I think could end up being really powerful.
Yeah,
and it's definitely a slow burn.
Yeah, and again, to reiterate, I don't think series like this are inherently bad. I think some interesting anime even have been told in this format, but yeah, I guess I was anticipating more of a somber tone in a series that of more of a journey. Not even because things like Kino's Journey has its upbeat moments and kind of makes you forget that there's actually a lot more going on in the character's mental state. But
there is no upbeat, there is only pain.
Yeah,
but yeah, I will confess my disappointments in the direction in this like first mini arc, if you will.
Well, thankfully, this show still has a lot of room to prove itself.
For sure.
Yeah, and definitely see where you're coming from. Those self-contained small stories are very satisfying, but yeah, we'll see where it goes. And sorry, I did want to bring a quick point to what Rob was saying about Aztec culture. Like, it definitely a culture where sacrifice is very important, but I think it's just trying to illustrate the how primitive this culture is, that because sacrificial culture is very common in the ancient and even largely medieval eras throughout many cultures in history. So I think using this as a narrative thread serves to really illustrate, well, one, it gives an easy conflict for this first arc, and two, it kind of goes to show the power dynamics that the nation of Yaname is using to manipulate nearby more primitive cultures. But yeah, and we'll definitely get more into that a bit. So, but moving on, as you said, they're beginning their journey. They had their little celebration in the village, and now they're moving on up the mountain. March is kind of put in this palanquin. She's kind of told these shitty platitudes by Hayase about there being freedom and death. March doesn't buy any of that shit, and she's kind of transfixed on this eagle, and I saw that as kind of being a representative of freedom in her eyes. And and the moment an arrow tries to hit Hayase, I believe it tries to hit Hayase, that's when she takes the opportunity to try running, and she does manage to get away. She kind of falls down a hill, and this is where she runs into our beloved orb, just kind of sitting in a pond, and then he regenerates right in front of her.
And what a brilliant scene of the resurrection.
Yeah, it was really good. I really like this scene. Scares away the guards who do catch up to March, and he regenerates, kind of walks away, and then March follows along. So next we get a sequence with March and Orb just kind of walking along. What did you think of this scene, the two of them?
She's very inquisitive.
Oh, yeah.
She's already, and she not only is she inquisitive, but she's also very intelligent because she already concludes that, the orb is immortal, concludes that the orb is not from their area.
I think it's more telling that she's not terrified.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would have shit myself if I saw what she did. Yeah, a lot more gory than I was expecting.
No, it's, I really like this scene, though.
No, I will, I like it too, but yeah, I'm saying, she takes it rather well for never seeing the viscera or the anatomy of the human body, I should say.
Well, yeah, turns out she has a high propensity with befriending the literal thing. So, she's following him. She attaches to him pretty quickly. He's vacuous as all hell, though. He still doesn't know how to communicate. He's just kind of wandering. And she's hungry. She finds some fruits. She decides to throw one to him. He eats it. And then we get kind of an extended scene with just him eating all the fruits. And it's really distressing her. But this is where he forms an emotional attachment to her, even if he can't really express it in any meaningful way. He likes her in his own way, if not for the simple fact that she's feeding him, and
she's a source of food.
Yeah. So, but eventually he falls asleep. She follows suit quickly after. She has a bad nightmare, though, where she's envisioning her family getting devoured by Oniguma.
It's survivor's guilt, essentially, is what she's having there. Real quick before we move on, I do want to kind of bring attention to, after March feeds the orb, its eye color changes to that boy and then changes back. I'm kind of what's the significance of that?
So I think that personally is just, he's experienced two states of consciousness now. He has a state of consciousness as a wolf and as a human. He's way more familiar with the wolf at this point. They have different brains. They have different ways of seeing the world, of interpreting the environments around them. I think in this moment, up to that moment, he had the human form, but had the mind and instincts of the wolf. And it was really at that moment, through his interactions with March, that he started to feel more human emotions and started to gain a more human cognitive pattern. That's just kind of how I interpret it.
That's a pretty reasonable conclusion. I haven't even thought of it that way either.
Neither have I. I was just trying to rack my head around the significance of it because you don't really see it any more outside of that one scene.
I do want to say for the next, pretty much all the way after that until the end of these 4 episodes, he has the yellow eyes for the most part, even then. But in that moment, you're right, he does have the pink eyes. So I think in that moment, it just goes to show he's, if only briefly, starting to think and perceive things as a human. So she has a nightmare about Oniguma eating her family. And as you said, she has survivor's guilt. And this calls back to the scene where Hayase said, well, if you run, then we'll use your sister. If she runs, then we'll use someone who can't run, referring to, the infant. So she knows in the end there has to be a sacrifice. And in this moment, I think she's resolved to die for her family, as sad as that is.
So, yeah, she is resolved. She gets up. She starts walking back towards where she figures Hayase is and everything. The orb actually follows, which, again, hearkening back to your hypothesis there, Sean, of still having that wolf brain, that makes complete sense because now he's following that source of food.
Mm-hmm.
And the episode ends with March saying, "I'm not your mommy, and then it cuts to black. That's the end of the episode. Yep. Sean, what did you think about the end of this episode?
Definitely not the most eloquent way to end it. Really, it could have just used probably a couple more lines of dialogue to end it off better. It gets the job done, but it's kind of an awkward way to end it. And that kind of gets the first sign of some of the more major issues I have with the next couple of episodes, really episode 2 is mostly free of it, but that's kind of a sign of things to come. But yeah, overall, quickly, what do you guys think of second episode?
Overall, definitely not a fantastic follow-up to episode 1, not near as strong. In complete agreement with the way that it ended was just kind of abrupt and an odd area to end the episode. No cliffhangers, like it doesn't really leave you off with wanting to wait to the next week. I mean, it's just kind of there. You know it's going to be there next week, unlike some other seasonal shows where you're like, I've got to wait a fucking week. I can't. That being said, like, you know, if this was the first episode, I would have never gone out and started reading the manga, period.
Sadly, I share that sentiment. I mean, I made my feelings pretty clear about episode 2 by now, so yeah, I don't have much more to add to that. Like, I don't hate it where it's at by the end of episode 2, but my excitement did drop quite a substantial amount. But
yeah, to keep it brief, I mean, definitely not anywhere near as strong as the first episode, but this episode has the unenviable task of doing a lot of window dressing, setup, kind of establishing the setting that's going to be important going forward. I think it does a fine job in that regard, but as a piece of self-contained drama, I mean, of course, it's not going to measure up to the first episode. But I still think it did what it set out to do reasonably well enough. So let's move on to the next episode. So episode 3, kind of leaving off right where we ended previously. March says to Orb, "You're such a child. You don't even have ink on your face." I mean, that's the line that kind of stuck out to me in that first scene. Just kind of going to show more about the culture of where she's from. But really, this lets her know Orb is not from around here. He's not like any of the people she knows about, but she does know he's immortal. So she starts calling him Fujimi-chan, or
Fushi.
Or Fushi or Fu-chan to contract that, which just means you're immortal, so I'm going to call you Fu-chan. Yeah, so next we see Perona finding herself captured because, I didn't really say in the last episode that Perona kind of got herself captured. She was the one that fired the arrow at the group, failing to hit Hayase. They catch her. Hayase reveals in this scene that Perona was planning on faking March's death, tried to just stop the whole sacrificial ritual. But yeah, she's captured. She's tied to a tree. She's being looked over by 2 guards while the rest of the party looks for March. And yeah, this is the next scene where we're introduced to the giant bear that they call Oniguma, just covered in old arrows, bloody, angry as shit.
It's like the truck-kun of this fucking world.
Yeah. When you don't have a truck, you just
get a big fuck off bear. Yeah,
you
exactly.
get a big fuck off bear, and this bear really kills the shit out of this dude. The other one runs. Yeah, the bear pulls a big old T-Rex from the first Jurassic Park on this guy against the one dude in the porta potty. But
so why is Oniguma so big? We keep getting this reference that, oh, it's just the bear. So are bears in this world like normally that fucking fuck off massive? Like,
clearly not, because everyone's fucking terrified of this. Like, it's not a normal bear. I think
even the
that
guard
should be
later
obvious.
says that. Yeah, even the guard later says it's not like any bear they've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Like, whether or not it's a god is like, we don't know, but it's a gigantic fuck off bear.
What we do know is that other guard just fucking legs it. It's just like, exit stage fucking. I mean,
he did the right thing. They should not have even tried doing anything. They should have just ran right away. Arrows ain't gonna do shit against that.
But it does show us how resourceful Panora is, which is great. She came prepared. She if I get captured, I have this little handy dandy blade in my shoe, this little bone knife that she used to free herself.
She had a little bone saw in her shoe. She gets that out. She starts covertly cutting her bonds while the guards were there, and then the bear shows up. And then it's way less covert from that point on, where she barely gets out in time as the bear is swiping to kill her. She grabs a bow. She tries firing a shot. It's fruitless. She's not a good shot to begin with. She runs for the cliff. She jumps off, narrowly avoiding 2 swipes, lands in some trees, gets away without any major injuries.
She lands in the same pool that March and Fu met.
And from there, she actually does catch up to Orb. But as we'll find out, without March, because in a scene just prior, Hayase and a couple other of her party find March and confiscate her.
Give her some little sleepy time medicines.
Yep. And this is kind of one of my issues, and to quickly move things along with this episode, but real quickly, one of my issues, especially with this episode in particular, is this kind of how oddly things are sequenced and directed. Like, they take March, but they don't really call into question at all Orb's presence. They're just like, who's this funny guy? Whatever, let's go. Like,
right. Well, and like, she's supposed to be untarnished by males.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No, it's a good point. And
maybe that's just a front that they're putting on. And
in the next scene after that, so little time after that, when they're walking with March and where she does give March the knockout drug, that's when the guards, like, that's the monster. Like, they didn't call any attention to that when they actually found.
Yeah, I noticed that right away.
Yeah, like, it's just very bizarre. It's probably not how it was conveyed in the manga, but the show, I'm like,
Yeah, even on my initial viewing, like, I was asking myself why these guys weren't freaking the fuck out.
Yeah, well, they have babysitter Hayase there. They don't have to think or be afraid while she's there, I guess. But anyways.
True.
So they have March again. And as I said, sorry, kind of throwing things out of sequence, Perona did meet up with Orb briefly. Have you seen the little girl? Of course, Orb can't talk, so she just runs off. But she does manage to find March. Again, not to get too ahead. Hayase, they walk up, they go to the altar with the group, and they tell her, this giant fuck off bear wandering around, it's Oniguma, we cannot do this. She's like, nah, you guys are bitches, we're doing this. They go to the altar. It's a really nice sequence where she kind of March, it's kind of illustrating her inner thoughts, her resignation to death. These lines of text going across the screen illustrating her thoughts. Very melancholic music. Really sets the mood very well. I like this. She's tied up to the altar. Everything's being set. Hayase and the group start walking away. This is when Perona tries for one last time trying to rescue March. Though I really got to say, Perona, your timing's really shitty. You should have just waited for them to leave before you came in to...
Well, they don't even try to stop her.
I know, and that's not even the half of it. But yeah,
it's just 2 meals for it. Fuck that.
Yeah, but to move things
quickly,
yeah.
Pretty quickly, we get to the assertion that Oniguma is on the way by the big rumbles. Another part of like continuation here, since you guys mentioned how the guards didn't freak the fuck out, is that if Oniguma comes through that main entrance like all the fucking time, or at least once a year for fucking sacrifices, please fucking tell me, how is there full ass grown trees there? If he just knocks them down in the first place coming through.
So here's the thing. Oniguma was really just a myth. They didn't really believe in Oniguma, the people of
Yanome.
Yes, Yanome. They didn't really believe in... They just use it as a tool to manipulate these more primitive groups. They're surprised when they see this big fuck-off bear. They're like, oh, wait, maybe Oniguma does exist. And that's why they're telling her, we shouldn't do this. We need to just go. But she's like, nah, we're doing this. Anyways, I don't think they're actually expecting Oniguma to come. Really, the reality is they tie up the sacrifice, and the sacrifice just dies of exposure and or starvation, and then they just come to collect later. That's how
that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how it actually turns out every time. But turns out not this time. Perona comes in
because if Oniguma, the big fuck off bear, was there eating that, there wouldn't be fucking bones there. Yep, true.
And Perona fails, of course. Oniguma Oniguma comes. He swipes away Perona. And another awkward scene where Hayase is kind of like, she won't save him. Let's just go. Let's turn around while there's big fuck off bear behind us, who might just run for us any moment. Sorry, this is a very awkwardly directed scene.
It is because
very
like,
distracting.
Among many awkward scenes in this episode.
The paw comes down and it looks like that's going to strike not only Panora but also March. Like, that's a fucking death blow.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
And then just knocks Panora away.
It reduced the tree that Perona was tied to in the last episode to like sawdust.
It doesn't
And
hurt
she,
her
like,
that much
takes
here.
Takes it like a bee.
All right. I mean, I'm willing to forgive that. Whatever. But really, it's just death by 1,000 cuts in this episode with me. Anyways, probably the most egregiously directed scene, though. As they're walking out to leave Perona and March to their fate, walking right past them is Orb. Just walks right past them. They need to be alarmed. Like, these are... you should be alarmed when this guy's
They're
approaching
warriors.
you. And he just
warriors.
walks right past them into the sacrificial pit. And it seems like only then are they noticing him as he's already in the pit. I'm sorry. That was just a little too egregious for me. I'm like, whatever. Fine. It's not deal breaking, but it's really distracting.
There's a lot of distracting things within this episode, which is unfortunate.
But to move things along, we are a bit behind. Orb does fight Oniguma. He gets the shit killed out of him a whole bunch, but he's determined to defend March with what little cognition he has. He keeps regenerating as the wolf.
And see, here's another fucking thing here. Is with this fight, we do actually have like a really nice like scene composition, like when Oniguma's crunched down on Orb's head and he's standing up and trying to get his body away from being fucking crunched on.
Yeah.
Like, his foot slips on a bloody tooth from Oniguma. And that's such a nice touch. Like, why don't we have this consistency for the whole fucking episode?
Yeah, and not on top of the not great direction, like the animation was mostly pretty rough. I mean, that's to be expected through most shows. You have your on and off episodes in terms of
Yeah.
This felt like an especially off episode from the production side, though. But whatever. I mean, this scene was fine at the very least. The fight. Orb beats Oniguma, tears off his freaking nose. Basically, Oniguma is pretty much down. Hayase realizes, okay, is this a god? Is this a sign from the gods? Like, we need to take this kid. Like, this kid is the key to something greater. Because not only does Oniguma, it looks like he probably actually exists, this boy just comes in and kills this god. So we need to take him. We need to confiscate him and the bear. And she goes up to Perona and March, says, you can either die here or you can come with us but never go back to your village. And of course they accept to go with them. And really that's the end of the episode. There's a really nice scene that actually did get to me emotionally when Orb says thank you at the very end.
Arigato.
Yeah.
Okay.
He remembers from when March was telling him how to say thanks. But quickly,
I'm glad.
what
I'm
are your
glad
thoughts?
that was heartwarming for you, because I'm sorry, I busted out laughing when I saw that.
No, it got to me a little bit emotionally. I like that.
I did too.
I can see why you thought it was I can see why you thought it was funny, but
I wanted it to matter, but man, it didn't. I'm sorry. We should move on.
Yeah, so overall thoughts of the episode, I mean, shit. I did enjoy it a little bit more than episode 2.
Same.
But
Overall, despite all of its problems, I think I did too.
Right. It's just so many consistency issues with this episode. I don't know. What do you think, Zach?
I didn't enjoy it more than episode 2.
It's all good
Man.
though. I mean,
But you know what's terrible about it?
the
music during the fight was great. It only added to the intensity of the scene. And like Rob, you mentioned, like, in his wolf form, Orb like slips on the blood of Oniguma's teeth. Like, little touches like that kind of grounds you in the realism of the scene and what you're watching. But I'm like, some of these just don't add up. And I'm willing to suspend my disbelief for a lot of what's going on. But yeah, just very inconsistent character writing and just progression with these scenes. But yeah, overall, I wouldn't. It's a stretch to call it a bad episode, but I did not
By
enjoy
this show's standards of what its potentials are, I think it's fair to call it mediocre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as I've said, we're pretty behind. So to move on to episode 4, we begin with a flashback of Perona's older sister. So this is when Perona was younger. She was kind of in the same position, potentially, as March. She's being told by her older sister, so we're going to play a game. You're going to hide here until I come back to get you. And it turns out she's been waiting there for a week in this tree. And she eventually goes back to the village, probably because she's very hungry at this point and she had no more food. And the village is like, where have you been? Like, we were worried about you. And then she's like, well, where's my sister? And they're like, well, she's been sent as a sacrifice. So yeah, we've come to learn Perona's very familiar with this tradition and how it's taken away from her and how it's affected her growing up and how she never wants the same thing to happen again.
It's
and
an antiquated tradition in her eyes.
Yeah, very much so. She doesn't see the necessity in it. And she even stumbled wait. Oh wait, no. I don't think she actually was. She ran into her corpse, didn't she?
Yeah, she ran over the foot of her sister's corpse.
Yeah. Okay.
Which did they just
so
randomly fucking cut her foot off on the way to the fucking
No.
Like...
My guess is, now realizing that, I don't even think they bothered taking her to the altar. That whatever group did that, they're just like, okay, we're far enough. Just fucking kill her here and be done with it. That's how I interpret that. Which makes it even
considered that.
Which makes it even more egregious and fucked up, and probably why she's even more angry. So that's actually very telling, because that immediately lets her know it's all a sham. They didn't even bother taking her to the altar. So yeah, no, I'm glad we went over that. So anyways, back to present time. The party is journeying to Yaname. This is where we get a lot more information. The old lady chose March, and she's actually a prisoner of Yaname, meant to act out the role of this old shaman. She said she just selected March because she's the prettiest. Of course, March finds this flattering as a child, but, Perona's pissed off. And she reveals that Yaname just uses these sacrificial rituals to keep the regions under their thumb. And
with their end goal is to occupy that region completely because of its lush greenery.
Manipulating through the pretense of tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So, Orb pees in the wagon. Everyone goes to bathe. And this leads to a nice scene where he sees his reflection in the water. He remembers the boy's request to remember him, and that's where he feels compelled to turn back into the boy, into his human form. So after this, we're introduced to Yaname proper. They're amazed by the sights of the city. It's way bigger than anything they've ever experienced. Yeah, Hayase offers to pay for whatever they want. March gets a nice scene where she gets to make a letter to her family. She can't read or write, but she puts a handprint. I like the sentiment of the scene.
Yeah, they'll know what it means, she says.
Yeah. But it's I don't think the letter ever made it. But no, it's a nice scene though. Then they get to eat some dinner. Looks like
just notice that they're still in chains this entire time, despite being quote unquote free. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yeah, it's Hayase is just giving them a small you can be free for a little bit, but not for long. They have a nice little Odin dinner, or sorry, not Odin, udon. They're eating some udon. They don't know how to use chopsticks, they just use their hands. I liked how they just put the hot chopsticks on their heads, like the headbands.
Head scratchers.
Yeah, I was going to say that's easily the best scene in this episode is March taking their head scratchers.
I don't know if I agree with that, but it's a funny gag.
You can also notice that during this scene that Panora still seems like really fucking sus of Hayase, which she should, that bitch.
Oh yeah, she's bad. She's a bad apple. Apparently their food is laced with Western morning glory, as Hayase said. So they're all knocked out. They're taken to prison cells, and really quickly we got to get through this. She's kind of talking with some higher ups from Yaname. This boy killed Oniguma. He's the key to our country's future. He's immortal. They try doing some tests on him, try to get him killed through some inmates. None of it works. Orb tries running. They catch him. They put him in a cell with March. It's kind of from here where...
Itai.
Yeah, it hurts. It hurts. So Perona's right above. March comes to learn. Cell above. So she lowers a bandage from the window above, and March is able to pull out one of the arrows from Orb that they tried shooting at him. So she ties it to the bandage. She lifts it up to Perona. So now Perona has kind of a weapon to get out with the arrow.
By the way, the Orb escape scene was far more well done and handled in the manga.
It's very quick. Like it's
very
kind of
cut shot.
Yeah, it's
bullshit.
very quickly, awkwardly cut sequence. It's kind of more of a montage. But anyways, Orb tries escaping by digging out, constantly chanting, "It hurts, it hurts." Digs into Oniguma's holding room, weirdly enough. And right at this moment, Hayase walks in, because March, of course, followed Orb into the room. And the guards mention, well, no one's taking care of Oniguma. Like, no one wants to, because it's a giant fuck-off bear that could wake up any moment and devour your face. But Hayase's like, well, they've tried escaping. I'm not surprised by this. They're in here. Let's just have her try doing it. It doesn't matter if she dies. Whatever. So she entrusts the care of the bear to March. And I thought it was pretty touching. March is trying to remove the arrows. She's caring for the bear despite the fact that it's a giant fuck-off bear that could kill anything and everything. She's pulling out the arrows, cleaning it, telling it it's just living true to its nature. And maybe to skip a couple things, but to move things on. This kind of leads near the end of the episode where the bear's dying and, she's pitying the bear. And at the end, Orb can kind of sense, like in the final moments of the bear's life, it said thanks because he has this kind of connection to things that goes beyond probably supernatural. I mean, as a fundamentally supernatural being. But right. The very interesting thing happened in the scene where there's a cryptic line from the narrator, "The vessel opened." So I thought that was very interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then at the end, we kind of see Perona start to make her escape. She falls, runs into a guard, and she holds the guard up with a makeshift shiv. And
she killed that motherfucker in the manga. Well deserved.
Okay. Got it. But yeah, any thoughts on kind of the second half of this episode? Overall impressions? I know we moved through that kind of quickly. But...
Again, Panora's my waifu and I'll fight you. I just love her character. I love how resourceful and strong-willed she is. Uh-huh. She's not willing to back down for shit despite her own fucking shortcomings. I think that she's a fantastic character. March still protrudes that, that mother's instinct to take care of this big fuck-off bear that's probably killed a bunch of fucking people, but she can still, sympathize with the bear and want to help it. We got Fu with learning Itai. So he's got, a little bit more verbiage in his repertoire. He can also like form weapons out of things that are attacked with him. So for instance, when he was attacked within the experiments, he was attacked with a spear. He's able to form a spear out of his right hand and then stab the guy right back. He also didn't, stab the old lady. So I think he has some sense of morality as well moving forward.
Yep.
But overall, I mean, another weird fucking ending too.
Yep.
But yeah, it was all right.
Yeah, and you, Zach?
Not much to say, really. You guys kind of went over the more interesting things about this episode. Perona is easily the more interesting character to watch going forward, but I hate to say that, Fushi's kind of along for the ride right now, and that's not where I wanted this series to take me, but
yeah, I think things will change, though.
Yeah, I have a slight optimism, but yeah, I still can't get over kind of the direction this whole series went.
So my last thoughts, I guess, on Perona in particular, I kind of pity her because while I love how strong-willed she is, I do think she's hopelessly naive, and I do think that's end up going to get her killed. Because she's naive enough to believe that she can just present the head of Oniguma to her people, and they'll stop believing in their traditions, which to me is just, of course, that's not going to happen. And the fact that she even thinks she can escape while accomplishing that, to me, just seems doomed to failure. But no, I do really like her character, though. I do anticipate this series getting a lot better, though, because of just its incredibly esteemed pedigree as a manga. But that's for future discussion. But anyways, we are out of time, unfortunately. So to wrap things up, be sure to tune in next week for our discussion on the first 4 episodes of 86. So feel free to give us a follow on our Twitter at 444pod, all 4s numerical. To receive any news or updates regarding the podcast, you can also feel free to email us at 444podc@gmail.com. That's all numeric 4s, letters C after pod, with any questions you would like featured on a future episode. So with that, thank you for joining us today. We hope you'll have a great week, and join us next time as we discuss the anime adaptation of the popular light novel 86. Have a good one.
Bye, guys.
Hasta luego.